I'm Jaimee Cali, lead fiction instructor with the Social Writerly. Today I'm joined by Kris Kaila. She's a Punjabi Canadian poet, writer, book reviewer, and blogger. She enjoys dabbling in visual arts, cross-stitching, and embroidery while drinking copious amounts of coffee or tea. And from her ever-growing mug collection. I feel you so much on that. So many mugs, so little time.
Yes.
Her poetry has been published in Mesa Arts Collection and in various anthologies, including being reprinted in the Indian Yearbook 2022. Kris is a member of the League of Canadian Poets and was chosen as the poetry mentee for the Writers' Trust of Canada Mentorship. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you so much, Jaimee.
I just wanted to add that Kris is also one of my former, I don't know if student is the right word, workshop E maybe?
I can take student. It's good. I
Yes.
learned. I learned a lot.
So for my October masterclass, the ghost story. So that was where we first connected, and then we've been sort of keeping in touch on social media since.
Yes, it was an amazing class. I learned because I wanted to learn more about the Gothic and the horror because
Mm.
I'm really interested in doing flash fiction now that I've kind of
Ooh.
gotten to the poetry. So I was like, oh, this could be a perfect. And I learned a lot about the setting and placing that
Mm.
I think I was missing. So thank you for that wonderful class.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes, I definitely love anything Gothic, anything Victorian, because the
Mm,
Victorians love to just take all of like the moodiness of the Gothic, and then they're like, oh, but we're gonna do you one better.
yeah.
And then modern horror, of course, too. But I there's something about the Victorian ghost story, especially that I just so near and dear. I loved their deep belief in ghosts too. Like they 100% believed every word they were putting on that page, and I think that that's makes it like a little bit more magical when you read
Really
those stories.
It really does, especially like with poetry, I find, because it's so tight,
Mm-hmm.
because you have such a space. Well, I guess in Victorian times, they were a bit longer than usual
Mm-hmm.
standard, but like just so much that they pack, like the images and stuff, and how scary it can be even in a poem. You're just kind of like, oh my God, what's gonna happen next? The tension.
No, it's true. And I think sometimes that people think about, not that we want to have a whole discussion of Victorian
Yeah.
lit, but I think sometimes people think about Victorian or Gothic lit. And, there is this idea that it's a little bit more long form, right? Like the
Yeah.
prose is much more of a slow burn. Even the poetry, to your point, is a little bit longer than what we typically see nowadays. But it definitely, you get it at the end. Like it's
Yes.
not for nothing. So if you stick with it, you still get all those wonderful thrills and chills that you might
Hmm.
get from a Stephen King novel or a Riley Sager novel.
Yes.
But that's not what we're talking about today.
Yes.
Today we are talking about, it is a new year, it is January, and so we're going to talk a little bit about writing goals and why we write and how we continue writing even in the face of rejection, which sounds, the last
Hmm.
one sounds like a very big topic. But I'm really excited to chat with you about this because, one, I know you've been talking a lot about your own journey in terms of submitting for publication and your relationship with rejection in your art. And I also know that you're on a little bit of I'm going to call it a 30-day journey, not a challenge, because I hate challenge because it
Yeah,
just sounds so aggressive.
it does.
Because I like this 30-day journey that you're on that you've been sharing through social media as well. So I thought to kind of get us started, we just start off with, what are your writing goals for 2024?
Yeah, it's funny because like every time I'm sort of ending 2023, I kind of like to do sort of where have I been? Like, what have I done?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times I feel like time sort of like disappears when it comes to your writing because everything sort of like a project. And so like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you start in 2020 and then you're like sort of fading in and out. And I don't know, like you just forget what you actually did in 2023 by touching it. So usually I kind of look at what I did and then kind of see what did I really find joy in? And I find journaling really helpful in doing goals in general. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I started even getting back into poetry was through journal prompts. And I really asked myself, like, what is it that I want from my writing? Like, I think the biggest thing we sometimes forget as writers is um, why we started, like what made us want to write. Because I don't think you suddenly just wake up one day and like, oh, I want to write and write. I think it's something that's always in us. Like my
Mm-hmm.
journey probably started back when I was like a kid telling, stories to my little cousins before
Mm-hmm.
I could even write. And then writing as I did in school for fun and just other purposes. Like I said, journaling, it started out with journaling with me to get my feelings out. And poetry for me is like getting my feelings out. That for me is journaling. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of what I wanted to go back to, was my roots of what am I feeling? What do I want to get on the page? And that's kind of what I start with. I don't really think about publications. I don't think about who's going to see this. I
Mhm.
just write and I just kind of put everything on the page and just see if it meshes with something that I do want to share or something that I want to continue on with.
Mhm.
That was a sort of a long rambling, but to say that for 2024, my biggest goal is actually just writing. I spent a
Mhm.
lot of time the past 2 years because I was out of writing for so long,
Mhm.
getting back with the community because I find writing can be solitary, but I find writing is also one of those big communities where people, I don't know, from my experience, people have been
Mhm.
so generous, so kind, and just talking about writing doesn't even have to be your own writing, but just writing in general, I think gives me a lot of motivation and inspiration.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I loved about your class as well, was that workshop of just talking about what you were writing, even if you weren't interested in that topic. It was
Mhm.
fascinating to find out how different people write. And for me, yeah, so I kind of pushed back on my, or kind of took back my time.
Mhm.
So I did put other things on a back burner because 2024 is the writing year. Whether it gets published, whether it's a project, whether it's just scribbles that just kind of fill up my Google Doc, it's about writing.
Yes, no, I 100% agree with you. And I do not know if it's just a universal, like something in the cosmos things. But it's the same for me. I've spent a really long time of my adulthood trying to figure out what do I want to write about that like will be like my big project. And I focus more on prose and fiction.
Mhm.
So I'm always like, what is my book? What is the book I have to write? And I read all of these wonderful books that are written by very skilled authors. And I'm like, yes, I want to write this. But I've spent so much time attempting to go from where I actually am to just, I want to write like X author who has, 20 published books and, is known worldwide, published in 30 languages, what have you. And so this year it's the same thing. I have set a goal that I just want to write 100 words a day. And I don't
Nice.
care what they are necessarily. Like right now, I am working on what will probably be something that no one will ever read, but is just like a witchy drama romance thing
Mhm.
that just that's what came to me at the beginning of the year. I had just read the Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, I think like
Ooh,
in November or October maybe, which is an adorable book. If you have not read it, it is so cozy.
I have that on my TBR.
It is such a wonderful cozy read, and I believe the author has another book coming out this year that I think I already pre-ordered. But I was like, I just want to write what I'm interested in reading myself right now. And so right now, apparently that's just cozy, witchy reads. And I'm like, this is probably nothing that will ever see the light of day. No one will ever read this.
Mhm.
But I have been able to consistently write over 100 words every day because I've just
Yay.
taken the pressure off. And none of them are solid gold. Like I try not to go back and look at anything. I just go back a few sentences to see sort of like a little bit where I left off.
Mhm.
Because I'm like, if I go back to page one, I will cringe. But I'm like, it's like a muscle, right? You just need to kind of get the muscle memory back. And then down the line in 2025, maybe I can say, okay, I did a whole year. I wrote 100 plus words a day, which I forget what I calculated it out to be, but it was a lot of words. It was more words
Yeah.
than I wrote last year.
Mhm.
And I'm like, then I can take all of that and maybe say, okay, so what is a project that I might want to write that I might want other people to read? And then the other point you brought up, which I love, which I don't think we talk enough about as not just writers, but like artists in general, but like the joy of it all.
Mhm.
And it's something that I know Sarah and I are both very um intimately involved in, is like this idea of like cultivating our inner artist and finding that inner joy and where it all started. So I love that at the end of last year you were also thinking in that frame of, where did I start telling stories? Where was sort of like that child in me that was like, yeah, this is what I like to do. Because I think we always talk about it's like a solitary act and there's a struggle and the starving artist, which is such an
Mhm.
iconic look for artists. But it doesn't get to shine the light on all of the joy. I mean, no one will read what I'm writing right now, but I genuinely enjoy every second I'm writing, which is so much more than when I'm not writing. And I think
Yeah.
that we don't talk about, yes, there's struggle. And if you're doing this as a full-time job, it is a lot. Obviously, you might be freelancing, you're submitting to various publications on a regular basis. You are facing a lot of rejection because that's the reality of
Yeah.
being in art. So there obviously a struggle. You don't want to downplay that, but there's also so much joy in being able to take something that existed just in your head and wasn't physically real, and now it is. Even if it's not pretty, it doesn't have to be pretty.
Yeah, I like that thought of yours because I think because when I was in school, I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do with my life, and it was kind of like, do I do arts and like
Mm-hmm.
struggle and be that starving artist, or do I like get a job and do the
Mm-hmm.
things? And I did the job and did the things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I realized, I think during COVID, just because we had more time to kind of, I didn't have my commute, and that
Mm-hmm.
extra 2 hours was like, oh, what do I do with this? And it
Yes.
brought me back to writing in a sense. But then when I was going back, because I'm also caregiving for my mom as well, so my
Mm-hmm.
time is limited. And so you have to really think about how you want to fill that time. And that
Mm-hmm.
time was writing. And like you said, it might be something that no one reads, but if you do something that you love, like I write probably before I go to bed is probably the biggest time or the most
Mm-hmm.
time that I'm able to write. And like I feel, as kind of cliche as it sounds, like a better sleep because I've gotten these words out. And
Mm-hmm.
whether, like you said, we use them or don't use them, at that moment, that's what I needed to say.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I do most of my writing at night too. I really want to be a morning person. And I have never been a morning person
Mm-mm.
in my entire life. My mom likes to reference that even when I went to preschool as a child, which is like it's not really a grade, but it's before kindergarten.
Yeah.
I went to afternoon preschool because it was just half a day because she could not wake me up early enough to send me in the morning. Like realistically, she's like, you would just have been late every day. So I think that that's a lesson though that it took me most of my 20s and like trying to force myself to
Hmm.
fit some sort of mold. Like I think a lot of us have an idea of like if you're a writer or if you're an artist, you wake up every morning and you have your tea or your water or your coffee, whatever your morning beverages, and you have your breakfast, and then you go to your studio or your office or your space where you create art, and you just do that for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, however long, and then boom, you're done. Like now you just but it's really such a personal thing
Hmm.
when you're creating. So I also find that I do it at night. And I think for me, it's this sense of like so much accomplishment
Hmm.
that my day job also, I have a very good day job. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not obviously like a soul fulfilling
Yeah.
thing for me. And that's my writing. And so I feel so much more fulfilled and accomplished because I'm like, oh, okay, like even so I have been doing more than 100 words, but even if I'm just doing like 102 or 103, I'm like, listen, I made my goal and I wrote a few extra.
Yeah.
Like, not only am I meeting, but I'm exceeding my goals, and that's awesome. And I went back and forth with how much I wanted to write because I was then doing math, and I'm like, oh, if I wrote 500 words a day, I could have this. But I'm like, realistically, I'm going to be writing at like somewhere between like 7 and 9 p.m. And I am not going to want to force 500 words out of myself unless it comes naturally.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, 100 words is a wonderful goal. And yeah, I do. I feel like I get a good night's sleep and I wake up and I'm excited to do it again the next day. It doesn't feel like a chore, which I think
Exactly.
is also something that some of us fall into, especially if we're not just doing our art for a full-time job. It can feel like, okay, like now it's that time of day where I have to go and produce something.
That's a really interesting point because I think, I don't know, maybe this is a controversial idea, but whatever you think your goal is, I would say probably divide it by two. So,
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying, 500 words, you did even less, that's even perfect. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think if you do 100 and then you do anything over, that's like a win-win. But
Yeah.
if you got to the 100, because you can do 100,
Mm-hmm.
you can do it for sure. And so like you feel that accomplishment, but when you go over, then you're like, oh my God, this was even a better day. And you have
Yes.
more to your writing. So I think keeping it low and realistic
Mm-hmm.
is so important. Because I remember when I first was in school doing creative writing, because you have goals and then you're
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm gonna even top those. I'm gonna write these many pages. I'm gonna do all these things, right? And when you don't do it, like you feel so bad, and like you feel like you let yourself down and other
Hmm.
people down, and maybe you're not a writer, and then all these self-doubt, and you already have enough self-doubt. You don't need to
Hmm.
add more. So I found going this round, I'm always going a little less, even though it sounds like I'm not trusting myself enough or not being confident, but I also want to make sure that my self-care is taken care of, that I've gotten to that
Hmm.
point. And then, like you said, that it's a happy thing, that it's not a chore where I have to be like, oh my God, I didn't do 500 pages. I
Hmm.
gotta do that now or whatever. And yeah, so I totally agree. I like that idea.
Yes. I think that, as like to your point a little bit, I think as writers, there's so much pressure, artists in general, there's so much pressure that we put on ourselves that I'm sure if you're at a level where you have an agent and a publisher, and this is something now that you do full time, it becomes more job like in the sense that you're
Mhm.
transitioning to not doing a day job. But for most of us, we have a whole day of other stuff that pays our bills.
Yeah.
That is very important and very time consuming from a practical standpoint.
Hmm.
And so it really is important that when we're creating our art, that there is that fun and there is that play. And I absolutely agree. I think that when I sat down and I was like, I think that this is gonna get me like, like this is, if I write X amount of words a day, like that's gonna get me to a book length by the end of the year. And I was like,
Hmm.
there's no way I'm going to sustain this. I'm going to do it for 3 weeks in January, and then February or March is going to roll around, and work is going to get hectic, and I adjunct as well. And so that's going to get in the way. And I'm going to have papers to grade, and I'm going to barely be able to write like a sentence
Yeah.
before I pass out at my desk. And then that's it. And so really I think that it's almost like an act of self-reflection to kind of acknowledge like, hey, it's okay to have real world stuff going on. It's, you can still have that image of, I carry what I think my inner artist looks like in my head.
Yeah.
And like she has this wonderful magical space where she writes and she produces all of these wonderful things. And it's okay that she just lives in my head and my reality is different. But I think that I didn't understand that until
Yeah.
probably I turned 30. I think I spent all of my 20s trying to somehow take the image in my head and force it into reality. And I didn't, until I was about 30, I really didn't understand that that's a magical space where, like, it's just a creative space. It's not supposed to exist in the real world. Like, that's
Yeah.
just for her, and it's just to unlock creativity and get all of those ideas flowing. I'm not supposed to take that and somehow like slam it into reality and be like, boom, this is where I live now.
That's also interesting to point out how you were saying in your 30s, because I think like people think that if you don't make it as a writer in your
Hmm.
20s, that it's too late. Because I'm 43, so I probably started when I was like about 41 into
Hmm.
this journey more again. And like I also was kind of feeling like the sort of the age thing, like, oh my gosh, should I
Hmm.
even bother starting now? Like, just seems so late in the game. And then also like being like a new student every time I'm trying to learn
Yeah.
poetry stuff with actual 20-year-olds, and I'm like, like I don't even know as much as they know. But I think it comes when you're ready
Hmm.
to kind of go there. Because I started pub or submitting when I was in my 20s. Back in the days, we had to actually mail it out
Hmm.
and like wait for the response to come back. And I don't think I was ready for it, even though I thought I was. I gave myself
Hmm.
the pep talk. I just don't think I was ready. So I don't think that anyone who's watching this, don't think about an age or when you think you should get it. And even if you kind of like writing, but you're not ready for it now, don't push yourself. I think it comes when it's supposed to come.
Absolutely. And there's plenty of authors that are published in their 20s, and they're great authors, great writers.
Yeah.
So there's nothing saying you can't. But
Yes.
I think there's definitely some truth, and I don't know who said it. I don't know if this is a made up quote, but that idea that like wisdom comes with age.
Hmm.
Maybe it's just an idiom, but I do think it's true. And so I think the older we get, the more, one, we're very much more comfortable with ourselves,
Yeah.
which makes rejection easier. It's easier to kind of separate, like they're not rejecting me as a person, they're just saying, hey, this isn't a good fit.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean there's no value to it, doesn't mean that other people might not think it's a good fit. It's just where you're submitting it. They're saying, hey, not for us, not right now. But I don't, I was not ready for that in my 20s, and that absolutely kept me from, I think, moving forward, because I had convinced myself that everywhere I would possibly want to submit would not think I was an author, whatever
Yeah.
an author means, in air quotes.
I know,
Like they
like if
would,
somehow like reading it, they're gonna be like, okay, this person is an author and this person isn't.
yes,
Like,
yes, like there's some sort of magical aura that goes with, like, I don't know, your submissions, but it really got in my head. And so I kind of tabled it. And, I think practicality and, not to use a millennial phrase, but adulting really is like the killer of creation and
Mhm.
imagination. And so for a couple years in my 20s, I was like, I'm just going to do my thing, and I'm just going to have my day job. And it was really miserable because I was reading still, which was good. I've always been an avid reader, but I wasn't, that was all other people's words. So it was
Yeah.
a learning experience, but I wasn't producing anything. And so I realized that I needed the balance, like that output. But I mean, I love all of those stories that you hear about people who are, have $5 to their name, and finally they get a book deal, or they get published in an anthology, or an agent picks them up,
Hmm.
and they find value in their work, or they get accepted to an exhibit or something. You really don't know what the future holds. And I think if you are creating art, as long as you keep creating art, you're on the right track. I think that people will always find value in art, even if it's not in the way you think. I know
Hmm.
that was like some of the driving force for creating the social writerly, was there's this idea that I think there's so many, to your point, like it's a solitary act, but there's so many people out there in this community. And I would say probably double or triple what you would see in anthology or published work, exists in the world out there. And so many of us feel like there's nobody else around, or we don't know what
Hmm.
we want to write and things like that. And so we really wanted to help create a space for, like almost like the non-writer, people who were like, I
Yeah.
have an interest, or I liked it when I was like in high school, but then I didn't do anything with it because the world said that it would be hard. Which it is, but
Yeah.
so is everything else in life. I think that art gets a really bad reputation for being, unachievable. Um, and for some people, maybe that's true, but I think that it's just the way we frame it, as like this thing in a gilded cage that is like high above. And really art is so
Yeah.
accessible. It's really whatever we want to produce.
That's such a good point because I also think like you have to think about what art means to you versus what other people's expectations are. Because
Yeah.
like in my head, when I was in those creative writing classes, I was like, right, if I want to be a successful writer, I have to get to a book deal eventually, and I have to do this, and it has to be like I don't know, like Stephen King has to blurb it or something like that, right? To
Yes,
be
yes.
accomplished.
Hmm.
But like you were saying, sometimes I've been to a few memoir classes and not shouldn't say a lot, but some people don't actually want to write for the sake of other people reading it, but they
Hmm.
want to write so they can pass it on in their family like a story. Like this is what my
Yes.
story was like, my life was like, and this is
Hmm.
what things I've learned and experiences. And that's still a writer. That's
Yes.
still someone who wrote something,
Yep.
even if it never gets published. So I think you have to first figure out what you're doing it for
Hmm.
and stay within what your joy is. Because I think if all you want to do is just write poems for yourself, just because you need that for your mental health or
Hmm.
whatever, if that's it, then yeah, that's fine. You're an artist. You're always going to be an artist if you call yourself an artist.
Yes, that is such a good point. I think that so many of us don't claim that artist title because it seems like it feels phony, right? It feels like, well,
Yeah.
I haven't done all of the things that all these other people have. So how could I possibly be an artist? But really the only condition to be an artist is to create. Um,
Yes.
and so it doesn't really matter what that looks like. And it doesn't matter who sees it or doesn't see it. I mean, you could write or create art for your pets, for
Hmm.
your cats or dogs or whatever. It doesn't have to be. I know people who, this is like a little bit more, like in the Reiki sphere, I guess, of my life, but like a lot of their art is really just driven towards nature, like just a way
Hmm.
to communicate and connect better with nature. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that, like nature's never gonna, nature's not gonna give you a book deal.
Yeah.
it may inspire something that leads to that, but you're never going to just find a magical tree in a forest. Oh, that would be so cool if it
I
works
know,
that
right?
way. And it's just like, yes, like tap me 3 times and here you go. So I love this idea of just finding your joy in writing and following that, because I think no matter what, if you follow your joy, it always leads you to where you're supposed to be. And some of that
Exactly.
comes with trusting yourself and your journey, because it's really scary to not have all the answers when you start. But yeah, I think art is all about personal joy. And if you happen to be able to pass it along to even a small collection of other people, then that's really just that's the bonus.
Yeah.
That's the extra words you wrote at the end of the day that you didn't have to.
Exactly. I mean, also to kind of go off a little bit of a tangent, but like I also am a avid reader like you
Mhm.
are. And I also review books, not like the professional kind, but just more of like my own reviews
Mhm.
for my blog or even Bookstagram. And one of the things my goals is because I don't really want to be an influencer. I don't really need like the
Yeah.
4,000 people following me. I
Mhm.
genuinely only want people who actually are interested in my
Mhm.
thoughts or interested in books that I read, things like that. I think there is a reader everywhere. If I can get my
Yes.
dad reading like sports books and actually enjoying it, I feel like there's a reader everywhere. So that's my biggest goal is to find a book for that reader. And I think that's kind of how writing is in a sense. Like
Mhm.
I always thought I was going to be like if I was going to be a writer, I was going to be like
Mhm.
an Alice Munro writing short stories and
Mhm.
doing this. And I started out as a poet now. So like you just don't know what's going to be your jam until you try all the things and see what fits.
No, 100%. I agree. And especially with something like writing where there's so many different mediums, I don't think there's any reason to limit yourself. And there's a lot of great resources, either free or really inexpensive, even in the online space, where you can kind of, you know, dip your feet in different ponds and you can try different types of poetry. Poetry, by the way, I am not a great poet myself, but there are so many different forms of poetry. And I find it so interesting that like it's just called like poetry.
Yeah,
Like I
I
know
know,
that
right?
there's genres of fiction, but you're still writing like long form prose. It's the substance that kind of separates the genre a little bit. But I feel like there's such a unique art to each style of poetry. It feels almost wrong to just lump them together. Like
Yeah.
I know Sarah's one class in the summer, her one student, when they got to the poetry section, just like latched on to sonnets, which I'm like, I love sonnets. Like, they were my favorite thing to study when we got to that section in school. I just think that they're really beautiful. And I think I'm just like a really old soul. I like all kinds of things that are a little out of fashion. But, like there's this idea that like you could be the person that sort of like brings the sonnet back into
Mhm.
mainstream or whatever it is. So it doesn't even have to be what everyone is reading at this moment. If you stumble upon something and you're like, like this really interests me, this sparks something inside me. I am drawn to this. And reading will absolutely help you do that too.
Yeah. I
You
also
should
was gonna
just
say, oh, sorry, go
let it
ahead.
flow. No, but you should just let it flow. Like, don't overthink it, because I feel like somewhere in your energy body, something is screaming yes, and you should just follow that.
And I was gonna say, like, writers are sort of rule breakers or kind of rebels in the
Hmm.
kind of start with anyway. And with poetry, there are people coming up with forms.
Hmm.
Like Terrence Hay came up with a golden shovel, which like is something probably what I can't remember when exactly it was created, but it was like a
Hmm.
current modern way. So you could be the next person creating something because you like a form and you're like, hey, what if I broke that into something a
Hmm.
little bit different? And suddenly you've done something new. So I think that's always a fun little thing as well.
Yeah, and I think about flash fiction or microfiction. This idea, like I
Yes.
think several decades ago, the idea of writing prose in such a short form,
Hmm.
they would have just been like, no, it's a poem. Like, no,
Yeah.
you just need to rearrange the lines and the phrases, and you've written a poem. It's not a story. It can't be a short story. It's too short to be a short story. And that's simply, like I don't personally know who started that, but that was a rule breaker. They're like, no, you don't need 5,000, 6,000 words for a short story. You don't need, I don't know, 30, 40, 60, 100,000 words for a book. You can get all of that distilled if you do it right in
Hmm.
500 words or less. Which is, I give so much credit to people like that, because especially same with poets, I think that when I write fiction, I have so many pages to paint a picture and so many pages to sort of lay everything out. And when you're writing in such a small space like that, it really like every word really matters. Every
Mhm.
choice is so nuanced. Not that it's not in fiction, but I think there's a little bit more grace if you take an extra line or two, right? If it takes an extra page. I know authors, even modern authors, that can go on for days about things that you're like, whew, that was a whole section of your book. That wasn't a chapter, it wasn't a line, it was a whole section. And so to be able to distill all of that, what you would find in a 300 or 400 page book, and still get all that emotion and have it be, I don't know, 5 lines, six
Yeah.
sentences,
I
20
had a really
words.
cool exercise where they said write a short story, how
Mhm.
many pages or how many words you want. Okay, now take that down to half. Okay, now take that down to half. Like keeping the same story, keeping the
Mhm.
same things, but now you're just taking out the words you don't need. And keep doing that until you get to, I think they were saying about 100 words. And
Ooh.
see like just see like how much you can just take away, but still keep the story. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
have to keep it that way. You can definitely go back to how you originally had it, but
Mhm.
just as an exercise to see like, can you actually make 100 word story out of something that's such a big idea? Because like I find some short stories like Alice Munro, she can take like a book size and just
Mhm.
make it into a short story. And I'm like, I don't need anything else, even though I would love to hear more of her stuff. But I'm like, yeah, I got the gist and I got that I needed from it.
It's a really great exercise too, I think, if you're trying to find, like, if you've written a lot and you're trying to go back then and edit, and you're like, what am I saying here?
Yeah,
So again, like you can go back then and add more or whatever, but if you're really trying to find like, okay, what was the meaning of all of this? That's such a great way to again kind of distill it to, oh, okay, right, that's what I was trying to get at. I still maybe want all of this description, but I'm going to rework it because this is what should be at the center of what I'm saying.
exactly. Yeah.
So I love it. So I know we've drifted a little bit from
Yes.
writing goal. But we did. I'm happy that we talked about this a little bit because I don't think enough people talk about sort of the idea that like everyone can be an artist if they
Yeah.
want to be. It's not some special something that we possess. I think the mythos of it is great, and I love this idea that there's a little bit of magic to being an artist, but I don't think it's supposed to be exclusive. I think we all have access to
Yeah.
that magic. It's just how and if and when we tap into it. But I did want to talk a little bit about, and it goes a little bit with what we're saying, the 30-day journey you're on right now,
Yes.
because I really love a lot of those. And I think a lot of pages do them. I know January, obviously, for the start of the year, but I know pages that do like summer challenges or end of the year challenges. And I think it's a really accessible way for people who either haven't written in a long time or are trying to write maybe in a different genre or style
Hmm.
can kind of get a feel for like, hey, is this for me? Is this the thing that's gonna unlock the inner? I always picture that like when I'm writing, I'm like my aura is glowing. So I
Yeah.
always I is that the thing that's gonna light me up? So I thought you could just talk a little bit about one, what the journey or challenges that you're working on right now and how you're kind of incorporating that into your writing goals.
Yeah. Because I think like how we were talking about doing our goals, like we have
Hmm.
this number, but then like you sit there sometimes, you're like, okay, well, what do I write about?
Hmm.
Right. And I think these challenges are a great way to sort of give you like a spark, kind of like
Hmm.
get you on a free write almost. So I'm doing Beyond the Veils. It's called just a 30-day challenge. And basically, there's a poem and with a prompt that you can do. And remember, these aren't like nobody's judging you. No one's going
Hmm.
to be grading you on this. This is just for yourself. So change it as you need to. So,
Hmm.
like, if I know, like you were saying, there's some that are just for fiction, some are just for poetry. If you find like one that really kind of gels with you and it's not the genre you want, guess what? You can write it something different. Just take what you need from it. I think that's the most important. And
Hmm.
even pictures. Like, if you're on Instagram and you just see like a lovely picture that, like, hey, that sparks an idea,
Hmm.
just save it, come back to it later when you're ready for your free write and you don't know what to write and be like, okay. Or a thing that I've heard is I don't know what to write. Just
Hmm.
keep writing that until something sparks. Because you can even be like, I don't know what to write. This is annoying. This is blah, blah, blah. And then
Hmm.
it'll be like a seed of idea will come up as you're like, well, there was that day that I did have a great day of writing and then blah, blah, blah. And you suddenly
Hmm.
got 100 words, right? 100 words is 100 words. No one's going to be looking at it to see, are they something that can be something? Or if not, like
Hmm.
you were saying, it's 100 words. So with the daily challenge, what I'm trying to do is just sit down and write something from it. I
Hmm.
haven't necessarily written something that the prompt has said, but something that gave me an idea. And I just like want to get something on the page. And I think that's the most important thing for me right now. And I also, part of this process is to not look at it for another month after I finish. Not going to go back, not going to do
Hmm.
anything with it, just let it sit and then go back and see if there is anything that can be made from this.
Now, the inner critic is it's such a challenge because you're always your worst critic. And it's true because people may reject you, but usually when they send rejection letters, well, if they send rejection letters, sometimes it's just, well, everything's through a portal now for the most part. So sometimes you just see on the portal like 4 months later, oh, it wasn't selected. But even if they do, it's a very lovely, very HR appropriate, like, thank you for your submission. We appreciate your interest at this time. Like, this is not something we're looking to publish. So really, they don't dive into all the reasons why they didn't like it.
Yes.
And so I think that's an interesting thing too, because it sometimes, you have to think about, like, is it a space issue? Like maybe they just had so many great people and it was just that mine didn't make the top 10, but maybe you were in the top 20. So there's, like there's nobody that's like listing out all of the grievances they had with your writing. You'll do that on your
Yeah.
own. But so it is so important. I'm trying to not look at anything I write this year until like I have like at least a good maybe like 6 months in between what I've written and when I want to go back. I think I want to say it was Stephen King I read. He said that he puts his books on the shelf, like his first draft on the shelf, I think, for like until he just looks at it one day and decides, okay, it's time to revisit. And I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, like to just confidently know that like there'll be a time to edit, there'll be a time when you have the right space and whatever for it. But he just finishes, puts it on a shelf or like puts it in a folder, I'm sure nowadays, because it's all on
Yeah.
a computer. Back then, put it on a shelf. Yeah, and then just moves on to the next project, like as if everything is fine in life because it is.
Hmm.
And that there's plenty more to say because he keeps publishing books, so there must be. And I'm like, what a great I mean, I know that it's easy to say, like, oh, like, but he's published so much. It's easy to be confident like that. But I think any of us can sort of take that same mentality, like this idea that with time, you'll have a better understanding of what you were trying to say,
Hmm.
what you want to bring out in whatever it is you're writing. So you'll have fresh eyes. You'll be less critical because you won't have just finished it and everything won't feel so fresh and raw. And I think it's an exercise of restraint for your inner critic who is always so quick to jump in and want to tell you everything that's wrong with everything you've written, down to like your punctuation choice and where you've set your paragraph breaks or whatever. So I like that
Yeah.
you're kind of saying, okay, like 30 days, I'm not going backwards, I'm only going forwards.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing that I really liked was this idea of, and again, like you can kind of make your own writing community, even if it's not totally official. But if there's people, I find so many wonderful artists that do, me personally, I really love like those cozy little like woodland decorations
Yes.
or like the little witchy ghost illustrations um on Instagram. And so I love this idea that you can kind of just find things wherever you are that
Hmm.
you look at and find appealing for or interesting for one reason or another and turn that into a prompt and simply just say what is the story here or
Yes.
what is a story in the world that this artist has illustrated. So I like that. I feel like it's a positive use of social media, which we don't hear of all that often nowadays, but I
Hmm.
do think it's a really great tool. And if you do tend to be somebody, I mean, no shame because I am absolutely a doom scroller. Especially like in like those weird hours of the day where I'm like, I should be productive, but like I haven't like exhausted all of my day energy yet. So I haven't
Yes.
shifted to like night and so it's like, what are you doing? I just sit on my phone for 30 minutes. It's fine. So it's kind of a great way to be like, okay, you can do that. Maybe set a timer for yourself, find
Hmm.
something interesting. And then at the end of that, do your creative thing, or at least mark it so you know you want to do something creative with it. So I like that. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's almost like you want to then reach out to the illustrator and be like, hey, I wrote this cool thing. Like, thank you for putting this photograph up or making this illustration. I'm always trying to
Yeah.
find positive uses for social media because by and large it's like a super negative space, I feel like nowadays. And I do think that there's positive places in there, but you do have to kind of hunt them out and look for them.
You do. And I mean, I just recently saw a beautiful illustration with a quote from Bell Hooks that I
Mm,
saw and then I saved. And then I kept thinking about it all day long. And I put down for myself that I was going to do a blog post. That's
mhm.
another goal that I have is to actually do my blog instead of just saying I'm gonna. So I try to do at least 2 to 3 days in a week.
Mhm,
And then I thought about this, and it wasn't going to be a book thing, which is usually what I do, but I am starting to write more about writing now. And so I use that as a way to talk about some of my fears and some other stuff.
mhm,
But I also credit them. Of course, you want to always credit the artist. So
mhm.
I credited them in social media and they saw it and they actually, responded with thanks for like, sharing. And I was like, yes, this is what it's all about. Like you can take someone's idea and let it root in your brain
Mhm.
and come up with your own thing. And you can, and I don't know, it feels collaborative, even though like we've never spoken. I have no clue
Yes.
who they are personally,
Mhm.
but yet we've created art together.
Yes, you've created art and you created sort of like a micro community, at least for this one project.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love anything that helps create community, even if it's not, I think that's another word sometimes that we feel like, oh, we must have a community and this will be like
Yes.
this thing that's always it'll exist exactly as it is. It's okay like that you had a mini community for that one experience and maybe there'll be another post that speaks to you from this artist and you'll do something else with something that they post. But even if they didn't, like what a great exchange the both of you had
Hmm.
to be able to say, hey, this had an impact on me, and for them to see that there was an impact. Because I think sometimes, especially with social media, there's always lots of negative voices, when you
Yeah.
post your art, and it's really easy, or like bot voices, which are sometimes even worse because they're not
I
even
know.
people. But it's really easy for somebody to be critical of something you do on social media, and I think that less people are inclined to sort of like pop in and say like, hey, you inspired me to sort of take what you did and make something of my own.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a beautiful space. And I think maybe if we turn social media over to artists, it would be a kinder, more wonderful place. But
I know.
that's not going to happen. But we can maybe use it. We can kind of subvert its main purposes and use it for our own purposes. And so I like that. And I do think that there's some wonderful. I mean, especially photographers and everything. There's so many visual artists on
Hmm.
Instagram that really you just kind of have to sort of find your people there. And then just like I said, I'm really drawn to all the cute little woodland things.
I know. I love those too.
I saw an adorable one of like a teapot that was like
Oh,
split in half and it had like little rooms and there were like little
yes.
mice living in the tea. And I was like, this is adorable. How do I live here in this illustration?
Ready to move in.
Yes, I please get like there was like a little like like a little fireplace and there was like steam coming out of the I was like this is perfect. So, just find your community there and it's like a resource or a tool.
Really is. I mean, you can come up with a quick story with that, right? About that
Mhm,
little mouse and maybe how they came upon that teapot or
mhm,
how they feel in that. So there's a story everywhere, honestly. Like even if I had like a really good so my mentor,
mhm,
Jonina Curtin, I took a class of hers and her prompt was for the day for 24 hours, just write down objects that you see. Nothing to do with how you saw them, where you saw
mhm,
them, just write a list of objects. And then when we met in the actual workshop, now we take the emotions and the images and put it together. So it's a process. So even taking things like that and just writing a list down,
mhm,
that could be your 100 words, write 100 things that you've seen.
mhm,
And then on another day, whether it's the next day, whether it's a month from now, 6 months from now, do something with that list. Even if you have no context to what it really meant, but I
mhm.
bet you could probably remember where you saw that thing and a little story behind it.
I love that because one, I think it makes us more observant as individuals because I think that we're super used to fast paced, high process, just do it, get it over with, move on to the next thing. That we miss so much in the world all the
Hmm.
time because we're either on our phones or we're thinking about work or we're writing emails or whatever. Our minds are always occupied
Yeah.
elsewhere. So it's a really great way to kind of put yourself back in the present and force yourself to actually see
Yeah.
what's right in front of you. It's I really like that. I like that idea a lot. I think it's almost like a good mindfulness practice
Yeah.
too. Like just anytime you're leaving you're running an errand, like can you identify even just 10 things?
Yeah.
You're going to the grocery store, like 10 things that stood out to you that you might not have noticed. Um, and I think it's really easy to incorporate because you can just, I mean, I'm again deeply, deeply old fashioned. So I keep like physical books and a tiny journal on me, usually at all
Same.
times. But if you don't have physical pen and paper, you do probably have like a notes app
Yeah.
or even just texting yourself or emailing yourself from your
Or
phone.
even take a picture.
Yeah,
If
a
if that's
picture
all
is
you have is your
fantastic.
phone, like
Yeah,
you see something, that'll still be your list. It doesn't have
yeah.
to be words at that moment.
So yeah, so I like that because it's again, I love that this is all becoming a conversation about the accessibility of art to sort of like the average person. And I
I
do
think that
think,
goes back into goals. Sorry to interrupt you, but I
no,
think
no,
that goes back into goals because I think when we make these goals of writing, I think it's
mhm,
just so daunting. Like even the thought
yeah.
of writing, because that's the one thing I thought about before I went into that whole journey. Because I was like, I'm gonna write every day. And then I was like, well, what are you gonna write about? Are you gonna write poems? Are you gonna write fiction? Like, what are you gonna do? That's when the inner
Mhm,
critic comes out, like, what are you gonna do? And then
yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do whatever comes up. So I took the challenge as the first 30 days. In
Mhm,
February, who knows what I'm gonna do? But I'm gonna try and before February starts, so the last week of January, think about my thing ahead of time. It doesn't have to be a big plan or anything, but just be like, okay, maybe I'm gonna do that mindful exercise for
mhm,
that month. But yeah, so the accessibility, like you don't have to get the prompt journals, you don't have to
yeah.
have a story going, you don't have to have anything necessarily to write every day.
And you don't have to spend money. And I say this as someone
Yes.
who collects journals. I have so many blank journals. Although I truly believe that every journal has a unique purpose. So I know that there's like they will all get used eventually. I just don't know what I want to put in them yet. But you don't have to spend a lot of money. I think that certainly if you do more visual arts, perhaps there's some money that you'd be putting into, photography or drawing
Hmm.
or more physical like sculpting, things like that. But if you're a writer, you really just need either a very inexpensive pen and paper, or you could just write on your phone. I mean, it's not for me personally, but lots of people do it. I have students that I am certain write papers on their phones, and more power to them. But I can't do this. But you really can it's really whatever you have on hand, and it's
Yep.
not. I don't think that you need anything. You don't need like a fancy app. You don't need a fancy computer or software. If you want to be really old school, you could probably like thrift a typewriter if you wanted something felt a little, I don't know, you wanted like a
Even at the
hipster.
library, I don't think people use enough resources at the library. Like check to see what they have. 'Cause sometimes
Such
they
a
even
great
have writing
resource.
classes.
Yes. And if nothing else, you could just find a book that's of interest to you. I know the libraries, at least by me, have tons of teen and adult and senior programs
Yep.
that involve either authors or writers, or even I've noticed that there's been a lot of combination of mindfulness and writing,
Yes.
or something else related to self-care, mental health, and writing. So it could really, to your point earlier, you could frame it as an act of self-care every day
Hmm.
and just journal positive things that happened in your day or one thing that you want to get out of your head so you can go to bed with like a clear mind.
Yes.
And maybe that's all you do for 5 years. And then some sort of creativity, imagination spark happens, and you're like, oh, boom, I'm a
Yeah.
poet. I want to write poetry now. Journaling is good. Maybe you keep up with that because that's a self care thing, but this is happening. And maybe that never happens. Maybe you're just a journaler, and that's okay too. I mean, at the end of the day, the thing I love most about writing, especially writing like in actual journals and notebooks and stuff is that like I get to physically put something on the shelf.
Yes.
And so again, I think that's its own kind of reward is that my words, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it is, they're going on a shelf. And I don't know, it's a cool thought to think like, hey, next to all the other books that I buy that are published and whatnot, like my words are also going on the same shelf.
You know what also helps is for me, every time I finished a notebook, 'cause I never finish notebooks because I'm like, oh, I'll just save the pages for later or
Yes,
something.
yes.
Celebrate it on Instagram. Say, hey, I finished a
Hmm.
book. Take a picture of your shelf that it's on there. I think like people think of Instagram also as just like a thing for people to see. I keep
Hmm.
it more as my own diary in a sense. I take a
Yes.
picture that I remind myself, hey, look what I did. Look how many notebooks I went through. So I was also a note like I collected notebooks, but I never used them because I thought
Mhm.
I wasn't good enough to be writing in them. Like I had
Mhm.
to have big thoughts, big ideas. And what I did with my first page was I just doodled something to get
Mhm.
over the whole, this must be pristine.
Yes.
And then second page, I wrote something.
That's awesome. No, I love that. I've gotten in the habit of liking my own Instagram posts too. I saw somebody else do it and they were like, this is because I created this and I love this because I created it. So I'm going to like it. And I was like, you know what? Yes, I claim that. That's for
I
me
love
too.
that.
So I put time into my very headed towards middle-aged millennial Instagram post.
Elder
And
millennial here, so I
yes.
got
So I
it.
put time and thought into all of that. And so, yes, I'm going to like it from now on. So I do that as well. And it's a little self-love celebration, I feel
Yeah.
like. But I love that. I feel like my Instagram is like part wanting to just share like books I'm reading and things I enjoy and recommendations, like book blogger kind of stuff. And then part again, like to your point, sort of repository of just this is all the cool stuff I've done or read or written.
Mhm.
Right now, this year, I'm a very big fantasy reader. So this year, for Christmas, I was gifted the Hero's Journal, which
Ooh,
you get to color like the pages, you can color in the pages as well as like fill in the journal stuff. So I like that
nice.
because you get like a little bit of like a an easy creative outlet, which I think always helps.
Yeah.
But it's really just like all it is it's just setting you up for your day so you can reach your goal. So I'm just trying to, as I complete each, they call them chapters, but I think it's a week. So as I
Hmm.
complete each week, I'm just trying to post that to remind myself, like, hey, like you did it. You did another week. You did all of the goals. And it's set up like a quest, like you're on this magical quest. So it like checks all the cutesy little fantasy vibes. And again, it's not something anybody needs to have. It's just something that I was like, hey, this kind of looks like it's like a little silly, which I like,
Yeah.
but like also a good tracker. It has an activity tracker. So like each day I put a star next to like I did my 100 words or more today. And it really just helps you kind of look at your day and be like, all right, these are the things that I have to do because life tells me I have to, pay bills and taxes and like live in a house and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
All that fun stuff.
All that fun stuff of being an adult. So these are the things that like I have to do to get through my day and get me to a place where I do have time to work on my quest. And I love that
Mhm.
it's called a quest because it just makes me feel like I'm in a Lord of the Rings esque sort of journey.
I love
But
that too.
yeah, and I think it's fun to have fun with it because it makes it, even though it's, like I think it's a serious goal in terms of like I want to build up being able to write consistently every day. It also infuses some of that fun, like, oh, I'm on my quest, I'm on my journey. And so yeah, so far it's been really fun. And you kind of, you lay out your day a little bit. You talk about the three things that you need to do in order to sort of fulfill your goal for the day. You talk about what's helping you. You got like your allies. And I'm trying to think what
Awesome.
are the other one. They're not villains, but it's like the thing that's helping you and the thing that's holding you back. A lot of mine is procrastination, I've noticed.
Feel like that's strongly one of mine too.
Yes, but it's good because I feel like I have a much easier time being very honest with myself. Like I think this
Yeah.
morning I was like, "Ooh, the thing that's going to really get me today and tomorrow is like weekend vibes because I love to be lazy on the weekends." And it's okay to be lazy on the weekends, but for right now at least I feel like it's really important that I do the 100 words every day. Maybe in 6 months I'll be like, "Nah, it's okay if I take off Saturday or Sunday or both." But I'm like, I feel like I'm still so at the beginning of it. I want to stay consistent 7 days a week.
And I
Um,
love that you said that because like it's always gonna change. Like
yes,
your goals aren't gonna stay like the same. You might
yes.
realize, oh, I'm doing so well on these hundreds. I'm gonna take on this other project instead.
Mhm.
And this is a thing I've heard from somebody that you have permission to do this.
Yes.
Once you hear that from somebody, you kind of feel like this is my thing, so I can change it as I feel. So you have permission to be a writer, permission to do all these things, change it as it will, because you need to worry about, not worry, but think about what you need at that time.
Yes, I love that. And I do agree. I think that we, again, going back to like this idea that, we're not an artist until somebody else tells us that we're an artist. You're
Yeah.
an artist. You have
Yeah.
permission to change what you're doing. You have permission to say this isn't, you can abandon a project. You can get halfway through a book and then just decide, I don't like this anymore. I don't like anything about it. It's not salvageable. And just move on to something else. Just put it on a shelf because you did it. It's something that you made. So be proud of it because it was
Yes.
time and energy, and then just move on. It's okay. It's okay to move on.
Yeah.
I'm getting better at doing that with books that I don't necessarily love, and I don't have a lot of them because I find that even books that maybe I'm not like tearing through and reading in one or two sittings, I'll still really enjoy. But if
Hmm.
there's a book that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I am just forcing myself to word after word read, it's okay to
Hmm.
put it, it's okay. You have
Yeah.
permission to put it down. Or you have permission to keep reading if you really want to be that person that like never not finishes the book, that's okay too.
Yeah.
We're all on our own journeys.
Exactly. No one is looking at us. No one is judging us. So this is the perfect time for kind of listen to yourself. Do you need to finish that book or can you
Mhm.
leave it?
Yeah. And I've had lots of books that I put down and I'm like, I know I want to read it, but it's just not the time. Like
Yeah.
when the time is right, I will be called or drawn to the book. I've done that with a lot of books. Like I'll try again and again. And then finally, for whatever reason, I don't know, cosmically, mentally, I don't know. And then I read it and I'm like, wow, that was a great book. And I don't think I would have appreciated it, or I don't think I would have understood certain nuance
Yeah.
had I read it 4 years ago when I bought it.
Yeah.
I think I know a lot of people. I don't want to get on a tangent about this either,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of people. I have a lot of books, and I enjoy. I think I've learned that I'm a bookworm, but also a book dragon. So I read a lot, but I also just enjoy like collecting books.
Yes.
And a lot of people who, and it's like older family members or things like that. They're like, "Well, did you read them all?" And I'm like, "That's not always the point of why a book might be. Sometimes books are just beautiful. Like
Yep.
sometimes a book is just a beautiful piece of visual art and I don't have to read it.
And
Or
you're also supporting the artist. I think that people
yes,
forget that part. Like if
yes.
I like an author, I might not finish their complete series. And I have this thing where I call it a holdback. So
Hmm.
I have like an author I love, but now I'm getting close to finishing all their books.
Yeah.
So I'll leave one of them as a holdback
Yes.
for when I don't know what to read. I'm like, okay, I know for sure I love their stuff and I'm gonna like this.
Yes. No, I'm a huge V.E. Schwab fan. I don't really want to meet a lot of people. Like I'm not like one to like want to do like celebrity encounters,
Yeah.
but I would be so tickled if someday I could have like 5 minutes of tea or coffee with V. Schwab. I just think she's a delightful writer. I love all of the worlds she builds. But she has her Shades of Magic trilogy, which now has a fourth book, which is kind of expanding her universe. So I think the
Oh,
idea is that you could just read the first three, or you could read this next set of trilogy, or you could read them kind of out of order and you could read the second trilogy first. It's all the same sphere and it's some of the same characters, but it's new characters and it's a different story. But I haven't read that yet because I'm like, there's at least two more books and I don't need
yeah.
to right now. Like if I read this, then I have to say goodbye to the magic for a little
Yeah.
while.
I
And
know.
I don't want to do that. So I'm just gonna hold off and we'll wait till all the rest of the books are out, maybe, or maybe 6 months from now I'll change my mind and I'll be like, nope, it's time to go back. I'm ready. But yeah, I don't think you have to finish it. The same thing,
No.
sometimes good series. I'm just like, I'm just not ready to say goodbye to characters.
Hmm.
And depending on the series, sometimes I'm concerned if characters will make it to the end of the last book. But it's okay. You could just, I mean, life is a choose your own adventure. And I don't think we're told that enough as like children or young adults. I think that there's this idea that like there's just paths that you're put on and that's it. But it really is choose your adventure, and you can take that to every facet of your life. Like you
Hmm.
don't have to do anything cooking anything any one way because somebody said something sometime, or you feel like that's the way it's supposed to be. I mean, if you were,
Yes.
I'm a little bit of a D&D nerd too, but if you were like super chaotic and you wanted to read a series of books out of order, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it for confusion's sake, but I mean, if that's what you wanted to do, there's
Yeah,
no one stopping you.
exactly.
Yeah, I love it. So I don't want to make this too long of a tangent.
Yeah.
But I did want to just talk about uh is there anything in particular that you're reading or working on right now that you feel really excited about that you want to chat about?
Yeah, I'm actually working on my first poetry manuscript. That's the mentorship that I'm actually doing at
Mhm.
the moment. And funny enough, the manuscript that I had first applied with is completely changed now as we've talked through things, as I've
Mhm.
written more stuff. So yeah, I'm not even gonna be finished. Like I remember going into this, I'm like, by the end of this, I'm gonna be finished. I'm gonna have a manuscript. And yeah, I think by October, we both realized that that wasn't going to be the thing because I had changed my ideas on it.
Mhm.
Things changed for me and how I wanted to kind of. So for me, the whole idea was not to get it published, but to finish a
Mhm.
manuscript that I would be proud of,
I
that I
love
would
that.
want someone to read. Yeah. And I'm like, if I get published, and that'll just be the cherry on top of the cake. But I've just
Yeah.
always wanted to write a manuscript. And that's
Mhm.
my main goal. So I keep that in mind. I don't even think about at that like right now where I would send it, what I want to do. And I'm trying to take like the slow moments because I am too much sometimes of a let's plan it all out.
Mhm.
But with writing, I try to let my artist come out in that sense of being like, it's cool, it's chill, we'll just do this, see what happens.
No, I love it. And I like that. Again, like I like this, I like that throughout this talk, like this has sort of been the big theme, right? Is that you just want to write a manuscript to know that you could do it. That you
Mhm,
could write a manuscript and you could be proud of it. And if you publish it, great. And if you don't, that's okay too. Or maybe
mhm.
you'll take a section of it and write another manuscript as that as like your inspiration, and that'll be what you publish. I think that's a wonderful goal. And I think that maybe not a full manuscript, but I think that that is something that everyone can take with them, that it's okay to just say, I just want to write something I'm proud of.
Yeah, I
And
think if you take that mindset, like, it helps
yeah.
you with rejection as well. Because for me, when I get a rejection back, like you said, you don't really sometimes hear whys. They're just
Hmm.
like, "It's doesn't work for us right now." And as someone who also reads stuff and, accepts things,
Hmm.
a lot of the time it's honestly because with the first few that we've read, they have a theme to it. And
Hmm.
then suddenly this other one comes up, which is a brilliant poem, but you don't wanna also take away from that artist
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
be like, now your poem's completely different, and maybe it kind of feels like an outlier in a sense. Like it was
Mhm.
brilliant, but just didn't work. And I recently had someone, I was shortlisted for a magazine because
Mhm.
while they liked my poem, it didn't fit in with the theme of what they were kind of going with for that issue. So that kind of gave me also a little bit of a confidence boost. Like, oh, great. It wasn't because of all these scary things that I'm, telling myself.
Yes. No, and I think that's absolutely true. I think that probably, I mean, I don't know if it's more often than not, but I would say that people like your writing or your art more than you realize.
Yeah.
And that there's lots of other like technical, I'll say, considerations that go into creating anthologies or journals or whatever it might be. And it's not always, I think we always internalize it as something is wrong with our art.
Mhm.
But I feel like that's probably not the case a lot of times. To your point, I think it's a lot of in the planning of this all, what is going to create a cohesive anthology or a cohesive journal or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I know that it's great that there's a lot of submissions because it means that there's a lot of choices, but it also means that you don't really get personalized. You get that
Yeah.
pre-form letter and you're just like, I have no idea why you didn't like it. I always I well, not always, but for the last 2 months in planning sort of how I wanted to tackle my 2024. I think to your point, like I just want to make myself proud. I just want to write something that I might want to read, even if
Mhm.
no one else wants to read it. My mom would probably read it, but that's she would read anything I wrote. So she's not a good critic, but
My parents probably wouldn't even read my poetry, but they would probably buy it. They'd probably
yes,
support me
yes,
in that way, but they'd probably be like,
supporting. Yes.
yeah.
No, but I think that if you just come at it with the idea of I want to please myself, I want to make myself proud, I want to make myself happy, then you're going to succeed in that goal. It's a goal you really can't fail from as long as you're working towards it.
Exactly. And what you said about Stephen King, like putting that novel to the shelf and worrying about it, or not worrying about it at all and just going on
Yeah.
to the next thing. I think you gotta take that with the submitting as well. Like
Hmm.
you submitted it, and you know what happens when it comes back as a rejection? That means you get to send it out somewhere else. You get to
Yes,
find another home for it. I always call it a home.
I love
And
that.
that idea of this poem needs a home. We don't know where it's going to be homed at, but we got to find places first and see what happens. So just kind of keep that idea of this isn't a rejection per se of you, especially.
No, and I like that too, that you get to, that's fine, you just get to find a better fit for it.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that you have to like now just like put in your delete bin and hide it and I don't know, burn it under a full moon
Yeah.
and that it could be a perfectly fine piece of writing or piece of art. You just need to find the right place for it. I think that's a
Exactly.
really good place to end our discussion because I feel like that's a really positive note.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us where we can find you if anyone watching wants to follow along on your journey?
Yeah, probably the best place is my Instagram, which is at Kris, KrisEsque_life. So that's Kris_life. I have a little link tree, so that kind of takes you to other
Mhm.
places if you're interested in more. And I do have a Bookstagram account, but if you find that first one, it'll send you to the second one as well.
Wonderful. Well, I so appreciate you chatting with me today. I think setting goals for ourselves and setting realistic expectations and this idea of being able to claim ourselves as artists is such a great, powerful way to sort of walk
Hmm.
into 2024. So I'm happy we got to do this. I know
Yes.
we're a little bit at the middle of the month, but it's still early on. So, if anybody's watching this and they feel like they've already missed it because it's, January 13th or 14th, no, if you watch this in June, start
Exactly. I was
now.
gonna just say,
Yep.
yeah.
There's no wrong time to start. So I really appreciate you chatting with us.
Thank you,
Um,
Jaimee.
Thank you. If anybody watching is interested, we are going to be launching all of our 2024 social writerly stuff to come. So you can follow us at the social writerly there. We post on Facebook, Instagram. We have a TikTok now, but I'm not
Ooh.
managing that. So I've given that to someone else. But you can stay up to date on all of our class offerings. I think we're going to have some really exciting new stuff this year. So if anyone is looking for community, we would love to welcome you into ours. So, but thank you so much for joining us and have a great day.